And today, we are embarking on a mission that I think really challenges the most fundamental assumptions we have about work and life.
It absolutely does. We're dissecting a playbook for success that feels radical. It doesn't just suggest improving your work-life balance, it demands you engineer a complete lifestyle revolution.
That's a good way to put it. The core material we analyzed, it outlines this path to productivity and freedom that is so aggressive it almost sounds, unbelievable at first.
Right.
And this whole philosophy is summarized by a framework called D.E.A.L. That's definition, elimination, automation, and liberation.
So our job today is to really pull apart those principles, the ones that seem counterintuitive, and figure out how they allow someone to break free from that gravitational pull of the 9 to 5 and become one of what the sources call the new rich.
And the tone is set right from the beginning, from the opening anecdote. I think that's so important for context.
It really is. It just throws that conventional wisdom, work hard for 40 years, then enjoy life. It just throws it right out the window.
It starts not with a business plan or a spreadsheet, but with this image of someone competing in the finals of the World Tango Championships in Buenos Aires.
A pretty dramatic image.
Incredibly. Performing these intricate, passionate steps in front of a huge crowd after 5 months of daily intensive training. And then you juxtapose that with his life just 1 year before.
Which is what?
Relentless grind. 12-hour workdays in London that didn't end in success, but in a crippling nervous breakdown.
That contrast immediately establishes the stakes. This isn't about small, incremental self-help tips.
No, not at all. It's about a complete and immediate transformation. The source material basically argues that if you stay on that conventional path, you will inevitably hit a wall.
A literal wall.
A literal wall, yeah. Either physical or, psychological.
Yeah.
It's presented as an inevitability. This whole system is an antidote to what they call the deferred life plan.
The idea that you have to postpone all your joy until you're too old or too tired to really enjoy it.
Exactly. So let's start by grounding this. We need a clear definition. Who or what are these new rich, the NIR? Because it's clearly not about being a billionaire who just happens to work from a yacht.
Right. It's a different concept entirely.
Absolutely. The sources are very clear. The new rich are not defined by their bank balance. They are defined by what the sources call the new currency.
Which is?
Time and mobility. They have deliberately structured their lives to maximize exciting experiences, personal freedom, and control over their time, all happening right now, not in 30 years.
So wealth is just a tool to get more options, more time. It's not the end goal itself.
Precisely. They reject the idea of saving up for 40 years just to spend it all in a 5-year window before they, run out of steam.
That makes perfect sense. The sources we looked at are basically a blueprint for achieving these huge lifestyle goals, whether it's Tango or racing speedboats or traveling a world with the minimum possible effort and cost.
It's all about leveraging smart systems, not just brute force 80-hour work weeks. It's the difference between being a laborer and being an architect.
The laborer relies on their own strength.
And the architect relies on physics, on structure. The new rich are the architects of their own lives.
Okay, so let's unpack this with the first step in the framework, D for definition. This seems to require a pretty radical self-assessment and a rejection of that mainstream career path.
It really does. The source describes the traditional path as a kind of societal epidemic.
An epidemic.
Yeah, this pervasive idea that your job title and your responsibilities, they eventually just become the primary description of who you are.
It's an existential resignation, really. People become spectators in their own lives, just watching the world go by from an office window.
And they believe they have to endure it because, well, they were told it's the only path to security. And this is where the material brings in Mark Twain.
Ah, yes. Every time you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect.
That warning is so poignant here. Because if the majority is all chasing the same deferred life plan, and that plan so often ends in burnout and regret, then, by definition, it's probably the failed path.
At least when it comes to life satisfaction.
Right. To illustrate this, the sources tell the story of a magnate named Mark. This wasn't some hypothetical person. He was real. Owned everything from gas stations to casinos.
So he'd achieved the pinnacle of conventional financial success.
He had the kind of financial liquidity where he could lose, say, $500,000 or even $1 million in one night in Vegas, and it wouldn't ruin him.
Wow.
But what was the internal reality?
Yeah.
He confessed with this sort of semi-smile that he absolutely hated every single one of his businesses.
He had the money, but he lacked the purpose, the enjoyment.
His life had just become this predictable series of, Trophy wives, expensive cars, and accumulated clutter, without ever stopping to ask the most important question.
Does any of this actually mean anything to me?
Exactly. He won the game of accumulating money, but he lost the game of designing a life. The money became a prison, not a passport.
So the ultimate goal isn't the dollars, it's the accumulation of options.
Options are the true currency of power. When you have options, you can choose to be anywhere, do anything, or walk away from a toxic situation. The whole D.E.A.L framework is about maximizing those options with the least amount of effort and cost.
Okay, so let's get to the next part of definition, because this is where it gets really counterintuitive for me. The source says we should set non-realistic goals. It argues it's psychologically easier to achieve irrational and unrealistic objectives than mediocre ones.
It sounds completely backward, doesn't it?
It does. If a goal is 10 out of 10 difficulty, wouldn't I need 10 times the budget and effort? That's the opposite of what we're talking about.
So this is a deep dive into motivation, into cognitive psychology. The justification is that mediocre goals, the kind that keep you in your comfort zone, are actually discouraging.
How so?
Because if the goal is common or easily achievable, it only gives you enough motivation to face the very first obstacle. The second a real challenge comes up, you just throw in the towel because the reward, that mediocre result, it just isn't worth the suffering.
So the goal has to be audacious enough to fuel the motivation you'll need to overcome the difficulty.
Exactly. That big, difficult, irrational dream provides the necessary adrenaline. The source gives us great comparison. Imagine you're fighting for the dream of racing speedboats through the Greek islands. That's a 10 out of 10 difficulty.
All right.
Now compare that to the goal of, say, changing your cereal brand for a weekend trip to Columbus, Ohio. Difficulty, maybe a 2 out of 10.
Right. If the Greek islands plan hits a snag, a supplier bails, or there's a registration delay, you're so invested you find a creative workaround.
But if the Columbus trip has a minor issue, like a canceled flight,
you just shrug and say, oh, well, maybe next year. The reward wasn't worth the fight.
The enthusiasm from the big dream actually reduces the perceived difficulty of the setbacks. You're prepared to fight for something worthwhile.
This leads right into another psychological trap that the new rich have to navigate. The source calls it the fear of freedom, and it's embodied in this metaphor of the fat guy in the red BMW.
Ah, yes, the fear of the void.
The fear of the void. So if I'm successful, what is this fear that keeps me chained to my job until I die?
It's the terror of what comes next. People just keep increasing their target wealth, saying, I just need X more dollars to avoid the uncertainty that comes when the work is finally gone. They're terrified of that existential void that success creates.
So the fat guy in the red BMW isn't a real person. He's a symbol.
He's the personification of your worst-case scenario. He represents the sum of all your fears. Terminal boredom, the fear that you'll get all this wealth, only to realize the life you bought is empty, dull, and lonely.
And seeing that image serves as a psychological deterrent. It keeps people working because the work, even if it's unpleasant, is a known quantity. It's better than the terrifying unknown of profound freedom.
So the correction, the real active definition, has to involve reframing the question itself. We shouldn't be asking, what do I want? Or what are my goals?
Because those questions are too broad. They lead to chasing things, a new car, a nice watch.
Right. The ultimate question, the one that defines the new rich trajectory is, what excites me to do?
That immediately shifts the focus from accumulation of things to the experience of activities.
And that's what leads to creating a dreamline.
A dreamline. So that's just applying concrete timelines and costs to things that other people would just call dreams.
Exactly. It forces you to calculate the reality of your biggest aspirations. If your dream is racing speedboats in Greece, the dreamline makes you ask, how much is the boat rental? How long is the training program? What's the cost of rent there for 2 months?
And once you define the cost of the activities that would fill that void, you realize the amount of money you need is often shockingly small.
And the timeline can be radically accelerated. It's about developing the habit of action now, because, as the sources point out, fear often disguises itself as optimism.
Right, we tell ourselves, oh, next year will be different. My income will go up. I'll have more freedom.
But if you're not substantially better off than you were a year ago, things are not going to spontaneously change. You have to take that radical high motivation goal and act on it.
Okay, so once we've defined this exciting, non-realistic life, our dreamline, we move on to elimination. This is where we get really aggressive about productivity, not by doing more, but by doing less.
Specifically, by eliminating the unnecessary work entirely. But first, there's a really critical point about the order of operations for people who are still employees.
Right. The overall framework is D.E.A.L, but for them, the source material suggests D.E.L.A. So definition, elimination, liberation, then automation. Why is that distinction so important?
It's paramount. It's about the political reality of an office. If an employee skips liberation and goes straight to automation, say they implement systems that let them produce 8 times more than their colleagues in only 10 hours a week.
You'd think their boss would love that efficiency.
The boss might love the output, but the corporate structure won't allow the time savings. The collective pressure, the cultural norms, the need for everyone to look busy for 40 hours.
So they just get burdened with 8 times more work than everyone else.
They become the company's new, highly utilized machine. Their productivity boost just creates a new, oppressive 40-hour expectation. The time freedom they wanted is gone.
That's the trap.
That's the trap. So they have to first eliminate the unnecessary, then get the freedom to work remotely or flexibly, that's liberation, and only then can they use automation to slash their actual time commitment without facing backlash.
The focus has to be on eliminating the work itself before you try to manage it better. So how do we start this elimination process? The sources introduce 2 bedrock principles, Pareto's 80-20 principle and Parkinson's law.
Let's start with Pareto. The 80-20 principle says that roughly 80% of your results will come from just 20% of your efforts or time or clients.
And the new rich approach is to ruthlessly identify that 20% and just eliminate or automate the rest.
Right. It's not about managing your time better. It's about eliminating the sources of wasted time.
This source gives a personal case study on this, right?
A very vivid one. The author realized that basically 100% of his daily stress came from the vast, unproductive majority of his clients. There were a couple of big, problematic accounts, but most of the noise came from the small ones.
So how did he eliminate them without tanking his business?
He subtly marginalized them first. He put the unprofitable ones in passive mode. If they wanted to order, they had to send a fax. No calls, no emails, no proactive outreach.
And they just faded away.
They just faded away. But there was one large, abusive client who was particularly difficult.
And he actually fired them. That seems like a huge risk for a business owner.
It was a calculated risk that paid off hugely in mental bandwidth. When the client called them the most disorganized bunch of idiots, the author just calmly said they could no longer do business together. He even suggested the client look into where all his anger was coming from.
Wow.
The cost of keeping that toxic client, the mental energy, the stress, the time spent firefighting, it far outweighed any money they brought in. Eliminating that one source of stress freed up massive cognitive resources.
Now let's pair that with the second cornerstone, Parkinson's law. Work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion.
This is so fundamental. It explains why the 40-hour workweek persists, even when we have all these tools that should make us faster.
So if I give myself 8 hours for a task,
you will unconsciously slow down, you'll overthink it, you'll tweak it, and you'll fill those 8 hours. But if you had a family emergency and only had 2 hours to finish that exact same task,
I would miraculously get it done in 2 hours.
You'd get it done. The work itself didn't change. Your efficiency just compressed to meet the deadline. The source gives this great college paper anecdote.
The one with the 24-hour deadline?
Yeah. A final paper worth 25% of the grade, due in 24 hours, and then a last-minute issue cuts off access to all the key people he needed to interview.
So the task just became 4 times harder and way more urgent.
Exactly. But the professor just says, entrepreneurs are those who make things happen, right?
Yeah.
And under that immense pressure, the student completely pivots, finds a whole new company, interviews everyone, and pulls an all-nighter to produce this incredible 30-page paper.
And gets a perfect score.
Gets a perfect score. The takeaway isn't that we should all work all night. It's that the tight deadline forced an extreme application of 80-20. He had to cut all the fluff and focus only on what mattered.
So the solution is to assign short, strict deadlines for important tasks.
It's the only way. It forces the 80-20 result into the compressed time frame. If you give yourself a week, you'll take a week. If you give yourself 4 hours, you'll get 80% of the quality in those 4 hours. And that 80% is almost always good enough.
Okay, now we move to what feels like one of the most demanding parts of elimination. The information diet, or as the source calls it, cultivating selective ignorance. This is a big one, so let's really dive in.
It is a big one because in our hyper-connected world, cutting yourself off from information flow feels completely wrong.
It feels like you'd be uninformed or fall behind.
Right. But the sources argue that information overload creates what Nobel laureate Herbert Simon called a poverty of attention. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. Our cognitive resources are finite, and we just exhaust them by consuming tons of low-value data.
Seneca warned about this centuries ago, saying we have a fever, when really the fever has us. The news cycle has us.
The news cycle absolutely has us. So the antidote is this very aggressive, very prescriptive regimen, the 5-day information fast.
This sounds like boot camp for the brain. I imagine it's terrifying for most people.
It requires discipline, for sure, but the reward is reclaimed attention. The rules are absolute for 5 days. First, no newspapers, magazines, audiobooks, or non-musical radio.
So music is okay, but nothing that requires processing new data?
Exactly. Second, no news portals at all. CNN, social media feeds, everything. Blocked.
What about TV?
Limit TV to 1 hour in the evening and only for mindless distraction. No news analysis. And fourth, no books, except the source material we're discussing, and maybe some fiction to relax before bed.
And the fifth rule is the real killer, I think.
It is. No internet browsing during work unless it is absolutely fundamental to completing your single most important task of the day.
That's the one. Because most people use research as a way to procrastinate on the hard stuff.
It's a procrastination mechanism disguised as productivity. But the surprising result of this fast, according to the source, is that you miss nothing vital. If something is truly world-changing, you'll hear people talking about it anyway.
So instead of that frantic morning news ritual, the listener should adopt a very short daily check-in.
A 5-minute check-in at lunchtime. You just go up to a colleague or even a waiter and ask, anything important happened today? I didn't see the paper.
And here's the trick, right? You stop the conversation.
The second the answer doesn't have an immediate material impact on your life or your work, you're listening for the 20% of news that affects your 80% outcome, and you just filter out the rest.
So the core principle is selective consumption. You have to get in the habit of asking, will I use this information immediately and importantly? And if the answer is no,
don't consume it. It's a radical shift. We feel like we have to consume information now because we're afraid we won't be able to access it later, but that's a pre-internet fear.
It's more efficient to just look it up again when you actually need it.
Far more efficient than reading it too early and forgetting it before you can even apply it.
So once we've cut out the external noise, we have to tackle the internal noise. Interruptions. The sources break these down into 3 types.
Right. First, you have the time wasters. These have to be ruthlessly eliminated. Unnecessary meetings, unimportant calls, and most emails.
The prescription for email is pretty strict.
It has to be. Limit checking to twice a day. Once around noon and again around 4 p.m. That's non-negotiable. And the critical psychological rule is never check email first thing in the morning.
Why is that so important?
Because if you check email first, you're immediately reacting to other people's priorities. Their urgent tasks become your excuse to postpone your own important work. You have to complete your most important task, your MIT, before 11 a.m.
Okay, so after time wasters come the time consumers. These are the necessary but repetitive tasks. The strategy here is batching.
Batching saves a huge amount of preparation time. Just the act of switching contexts from a complex project to paying bills is where you lose so much time and focus. By grouping all similar tasks into one block of time, you minimize that.
Let's break down the math on this because I think people fear that batching will lead to lost sales or opportunities.
So let's say your time is worth $20 an hour. Checking email once a week might save you 10 hours a week in total cognitive load and administrative time. That's $200 of your time.
Okay.
Now, maybe that delay results in you losing 2 sales with a total lost profit of $80. You're still looking at a net gain of $120, plus you get 10 hours of your life back to work on high-priority tasks.
The mental bandwidth you gain is the real currency there.
It is. The time saved is great, but eliminating that constant drip feed of interruptions is the real prize.
And finally, we address delegation failures. This is when a manager becomes a bottleneck because every minor thing needs their approval. The solution here is empowerment.
The BrainQuicken case study illustrates this perfectly. The owner had outsourced customer service, but he was getting hundreds of emails a day from his reps.
Not about the product, but just asking for permission.
Exactly. Can we reship this damaged product? Can we process this refund? He'd become the checkpoint for every tiny decision.
So instead of writing some huge 50-page manual that no one would read,
he implemented a single radical policy. It was elegant and simple. If this is a problem costing less than $100 to resolve, use your judgment and resolve it.
He gave them a budget and told them to use their own judgment.
He said, I am no longer your client. My clients are your clients. Don't ask for permission. Do what you think is right.
But what was the risk there? That they'd abuse it?
The risk was that maybe some reps would abuse it and the company might lose an extra $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
But the cost of those hundreds of daily emails, the interruptions, the administrative time, the stress, was so much higher than that theoretical $1,000 loss.
And the result?
He cut hundreds of daily emails down to fewer than 20 a week, instantly. That is the essence of empowerment.
And a final quick word on meetings, which the sources call what? An addictive and highly self-indulgent activity.
The protocol is simple. Avoid them. Use email. If you absolutely can't avoid one, you go in with clear objectives, a written agenda, and a hard stop time. Or you just leave early. Time is your most limited resource.
All right, so we've defined the dream, we've eliminated the waste. Now we get to A, automation. This is where we learn to replace ourselves. And the first step is often outsourcing daily life with virtual assistants or VAs.
Right. Outsourcing your life is basically an exercise in applied management and extreme 80-20. You delegate everything that consumes your time but isn't part of your critical high-leverage activities.
The sources give us the perfect, almost absurd example of this with the A.J. Jacobs anecdote. He was an editor for Esquire who outsourced his entire personal life.
This story is fantastic because it just shows how far you can push this. Jacobs outsourced everything from paying his bills to buying holiday gifts. His VA had to track down a chicken dance Elmo when the Tickle Me Elmo was sold out.
But the craziest part was when he tried to delegate emotional labor.
Oh, yeah. He tried to outsource his apologies to his wife. His VA, Asha, sent his wife an e-card with 2 hugging teddy bears that said, "I'm sorry."
That sounds like a recipe for absolute disaster.
Yeah.
How did he outsource sincerity without ending up divorced?
It's funny, but the act of having to articulate the need for an apology to a third party actually forced him to think more clearly about what he'd done wrong. It was about outsourcing the logistics of emotional maintenance, not the emotion itself. It proved that 80% of even that kind of communication is just logistics.
But for the new rich, the real power comes from geoarbitrage, leveraging global differences in wages and currency.
This is the financial bedrock of the whole model. If you're earning in dollars or euros, living somewhere with a low cost of living, like where you use pesos, and then paying VAs in an even lower wage economy, like where they use rupees,
You create a situation where it's almost impossible to lose money.
it's a curious commercial phenomenon, as the source calls it. A US-based VA might be $50 an hour, but a skilled VA in India might be $5 or $10.
But the sources are quick to warn that the cheapest VA isn't always the best value.
No, the crucial measure is the cost per task completed. The source shares this initial failure with an inexpensive VA who wasted 23 hours trying to do 3 simple tasks. It cost $230, and the work still wasn't done.
And then what happened?
He hired a slightly more expensive Canadian VA, English as a first language, who did the exact same 3 tasks in 2 hours for $50.
So 4 times the results for a fraction of the total cost. Competency and communication are what matter, not the raw hourly rate.
It's all about the cost per output. The lesson is to set strict hourly limits at first and really demand strong qualifications, especially language skills, to avoid wasting time in endless clarification emails.
Now, this all leads to the ultimate goal of automation, which is building the Muse a product or service that generates passive income and replaces the owner. Let's really break down the criteria for finding the perfect Muse.
Okay, so there are 5 key criteria. The first one is niche focus, the classic line. If everyone is your client, nobody is your client. You have to restrict your market.
And the source has a very specific test for this.
A very specific test. Focus on 2 markets you know well, where you can find dedicated magazines where a full-page ad costs less than $5,000 and the subscriber base is over 15,000.
Why is that magazine test so important?
It proves 2 things. 1, the niche is narrow enough that you can target it without a massive ad spend. And 2, the audience is dedicated enough to subscribe to specialized content, which means they're already pre-qualified buyers.
Okay, what's the second criterion?
This one is crucial. Pricing strategy. Products should cost the customer between $50 and $200, and you should aim for an aggressive 8 to 10 times markup.
So a $100 product should cost you no more than $12.50 to make. Why is that high margin so important for the new rich?
It boils down to stability and having fewer headaches. There are 3 main benefits. First, you need to sell way fewer units to hit your financial goals. That's a faster path to freedom.
Fewer customers means less customer service.
Exactly, which is the second point. Higher price points attract lower maintenance customers. The source suggests most of the refund requests and demanding emails come from your cheapest customers.
And the third benefit?
A higher profit margin gives you a huge safety net. It protects you against rising vendor costs or supply chain issues. A business with a 5x markup can get wiped out by a price spike, but one with a 10x markup can absorb it.
That makes sense. The high margin protects the automation system itself, which brings us to product type. The sources seem to heavily favor information products.
They are the gold standard for automation because the reproduction cost is almost zero. Think of an instructional DVD. You might sell it for $95, but the cost to burn a new disc and put it in a case is maybe $2.
That's an insane markup.
It is. The source mentions a guy who made hundreds of thousands of dollars selling low-budget DVDs, teaching warehouse owners how to install their own security systems. A hyper-specific, ignored niche, and he did it with no employees.
But the big psychological barrier for a lot of people is that I'm not an expert fear. What if you don't feel qualified to create a course?
The sources completely redefine expertise. You only need to know more than the buyer. You don't have to be the world's leading authority. You just need to deliver the 20% of knowledge that gets them 80% of the results they want.
So you calculate your minimum viable customer base, the absolute smallest number of customers you need to fund your dreamline.
Exactly. If your dream trip costs $12,000 and your product nets you $80 profit, you only need to find 150 customers. 150. Thinking about it that way makes it seem so much more achievable than trying to reach millions.
Which brings us to the fourth point, micro-testing before manufacturing. The principle is never ask people if they would buy, only ask them to buy.
This is all about using cheap, small ads to test the market before you spend any money on production. Sherwood's t-shirt test is the classic example.
Right. He had an idea for a highly specialized $100 t-shirt.
Instead of ordering thousands of them who just took out a cheap ad in a magazine. And crucially, the ad copy included a list of FAQs to cut down on informational phone calls.
And people bought it, a product that didn't even exist yet.
He sold 24 shirts in 5 days. That proved the concept, the niche, and the price point were all viable. And with that proof, he had the leverage to go back and negotiate a 30% discount on a bigger ad contract. You test the demand before you create the supply.
Okay, finally, the virtual architecture. This is the ghost in the machine that lets the owner step completely outside the day-to-day operations.
The goal here is to deliberately place yourself outside the flow of information. The old model puts the owner right in the middle, which is why they're always interrupted.
So what does the automated structure look like?
It's streamlined. An online ad or an 800 number feeds directly into a call center or a VA team. They take the order and pass it to a payment processor.
And from there, it's all hands off for the owner.
Completely. The payment processor notifies the manufacturer sends the product to a fulfillment company, and the fulfillment company ships it to the customer.
And the owner's only connection is seeing the deposit hit their bank account 24 to 48 hours later.
That's it. You can run a sophisticated business with hundreds of third-party contractors, and the only employee, the owner, is doing maybe 4 hours of strategic maintenance a week.
So we've defined the dream, eliminated the waste, and automated the income. We arrive at the final stage, L for liberation. This is where the physical chains are broken, and the sources say this is often done by asking for forgiveness, not permission.
The Dave Camarill case study is the perfect example of this. He was a long-time, high-performing employee at HP. He decided he was going to take a 30-day trip to China. He didn't ask his boss.
He just went.
He just forwarded his calls to his new wife's cell phone and left.
And what happened when he came back? I imagine his boss was furious.
Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Nobody at HP even noticed he was gone. His performance was so solid and his systems were so efficient that his physical presence was irrelevant to his output.
So he earned his freedom through performance and presumption.
He earned the Eagle Scout Medal of Mobility, as the source calls it. After that, his boss fully supported his plan to take 2 months off every year.
This systematic freedom leads right to the core concept of this section, the mini-retirement. It's the direct opposite of that 40-year deferred life plan.
A mini-retirement is about taking those 20 or 30 years of traditional retirement and just redistributing them throughout your life. Instead of waiting until you're 65, you take 3 to 6 months off every few years to travel, learn a language, pursue a passion project.
The philosophy is perfectly captured in the fisherman parable.
It's such a great story. A Harvard MBA sees this fisherman just enjoying a simple life. Fishes a little, rests, plays music with his family.
And the MBA, of course, has a plan to optimize everything.
He lays out this complex 25-year plan. Work harder, buy more boats, build a fleet, sell shares for millions, retire rich, and then building. And you can fish a little, sleep, and play music with your family.
And the fisherman just asks.
But I already do that now, senor.
It's a devastating indictment of our obsession with accumulation over present experience. Why spend decades chasing wealth when the life you actually want costs less than your current rent?
And the answer is geoarbitrage. Freeing yourself from your geography makes your money worth 3 to 10 times more. The Force gives these specific examples from Buenos Aires.
The costs were incredible.
2 hours of private Spanish lessons for $5 an hour. 2 hours of tango lessons with world-class dancers for $8.33 an hour. Even a VIP table at a top nightclub with champagne was only $150 for 8 people.
When you factor in the cost of living in a major U.S. city, the source argues that living abroad can actually save you money. It turns travel from a luxury into an economic advantage.
But the biggest obstacle isn't money. It's the psychological fear that dresses up as practical excuses. Safety, kids, logistics.
Right, people assume a faraway place is automatically more dangerous.
And the sources explicitly debunk that. Cities like Buenos Aires or Shanghai often have statistically less violent crime than major U.S. cities. The perception of danger is often just a fear of the unknown.
And the biggest excuse of all. I can't travel long-term with children. But we have the story of Robin Malinsky-Rummel,
who traveled South America for a year with her husband and her 7-year-old son. She came to believe that kids are the main reason you should travel, not a reason not to.
How so?
Her kids, who used to fight all the time in a big suburban house, learned patience and coexistence in the close quarters of a sailboat cabin. They started reading books because there was nothing else to do. She said taking them out of school for a year to experience the world was the best investment she ever made in their education.
And there's a very practical tip for handling kids' behavior on the road.
A simple system of financial accountability. Each kid earns, say, 50 cents of virtual money for every hour of good behavior. And they get deductions for misbehavior.
And all the fun stuff, souvenirs, ice cream comes out of their own account.
If they run out of money, they run out of souvenirs. It teaches them financial limits and behavior control all at once.
The process of liberation is also tied to this minimalist approach. Long-term travel forces you to get rid of years of accumulated clutter.
It's a physical and mental purge. The sources say that eliminating clutter provides huge mental space, like turning off 20 mental applications that are always running in the background.
Every single nomad they interviewed had the same recommendation.
Unanimous. Take the least amount of luggage possible. You have to be merciless in getting rid of the 80% of your belongings that consume 80% of your time and energy.
Okay, let's quickly run through the practical logistics for maintaining this mobility while your Muse is running.
Right, it's about reducing friction. For finance, use rewards credit cards for free flights and set up autopay for all your bills.
For housing, never book more than a month in advance.
No, it's riskier and more expensive. You use Craigslist or stay in a hostel for a few nights when you arrive. The hostel staff always know the best local deals on apartments.
For communication, an unlocked phone with a local SIM card
saves a fortune. And use a service like Vonage to keep your U.S. phone number. For access, something like Go to My PC to get to your home computer files from any internet cafe.
This systematic liberation sounds amazing, but once the novelty wears off, we're back to that fear of the void. The sources admit this freedom can lead to a kind of postpartum depression.
That's why the D for definition step was so important. Freedom is like a new sport. It's exciting at first, but to be a regular player, you need practice and purpose. And you have to avoid getting bogged down in those huge, ill-defined questions like, what is the meaning of life?
The source argues that trying to answer a question like that is a complete waste of time.
Because the terms themselves are ambiguous. It's a poorly formed question, so it's impossible to solve definitively.
That's a hugely liberating thought in itself. If the question is ill-defined, you don't have to answer it.
Correct. So the goal isn't to solve the void, but to create purpose. A vocation, a calling. The key to filling that existential vacuum is to serve others.
And serving others doesn't just mean saving lives.
No. It means improving them. A musician who practices 15 hours a day because their music makes people smile, that's serving. A teacher who changes one child's life, that's serving. It's about committing to something bigger than yourself. That's what transforms an activity from work into a true vocation.
So we've completed our deep dive through this really radical manifesto. Let's just briefly recap the D.E.A.L framework.
It all started with D, defining that non-realistic dream, rejecting the deferred life plan, and calculating the cost of your experiences on a dreamline. Then came E, eliminating the trivial 80% with Pareto's rule, and forcing efficiency with Parkinson's law.
Next was A, automating your income with VAs, Geoarbitrage, and creating a Muse. That product sold at an 8 to 10 times markup in a niche market, all micro-tested before production.
And finally, L, liberating yourself by taking mini retirements, breaking the chains of geography, and proactively filling that existential void with a real purpose or vocation.
The ultimate errors that trip people up, they're rarely systemic, are they? They're almost always psychological.
Almost always. The sources highlight 3 major traps.
What are those errors we have to be so aware of?
First, overanalyzing small, non-critical problems. Spending an hour debating a font choice when the business is running itself. Second, letting fear disguise itself as optimism, that self-deception that things will just magically get better next year without any radical action.
And the third one is probably the biggest trap.
Making tasks urgent when they aren't, just to justify the feeling of working and being productive.
The energy that most of us spend chasing a conventional, unsatisfying success, it can be replaced by this incredible lightness when you finally realize that the only real limits are the ones we impose on ourselves. It reminds me of that Steve Jobs quote, "The sources site."
Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose.
All the false pride, all the fear of embarrassment, all of it just disappears in the face of that reality. It leaves only what's truly important to your dreamline.
If you're confused about life, you're not alone. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a reality that demands to be lived right now.
So as you start to think about applying this D.E.A.L framework to your own life, aiming for that 4-hour work week, here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. The sources highlight that constant struggle to avoid terminal boredom once you remove the need to work. So if you achieve that 4-hour work week and that work is almost entirely automated, what single non-work activity, vocation, would be so genuinely engaging, so much your true calling, that you would still commit 15 hours a day to it simply because you couldn't imagine doing anything else? Finding that genuine, consuming purpose is the ultimate test of your true liberation.
Until next time, keep digging deep.
We'll see you soon for the next deep dive.